Thanks so much for joining us once again. I'm Minister Mitchell Fields, and this is Truth for Today. Our study this week takes us to the book of Genesis, chapter 11. And for those who are unfamiliar with this portion of the Bible, at this point in human history, it says that the world had one language and one common speech, meaning everyone in the entire world at this particular point in time communicated with the same dialect. And not only did they speak the same way, but they also thought and acted with a singular, unified purpose, with no possible room for miscommunication. Really quickly, if you could even imagine such a time to be alive, it seems almost like an impossibility, especially when you consider the world we live in today, where you're hard-pressed to find just two people, let alone an entire population, that can coexist without any miscommunication at all. But this is what we find at this point in the Bible. This idea of being completely unified is central to our study and understanding the sin that lies ahead. Because with all of this unity and all of this potential for the world to achieve, they decided among themselves that they would build a city for themselves and build a tower that reaches the heavens so they could make a name for themselves. Other versions of the Bible help disclose their motivation behind this decision and let us know that they thought that making a city would make them famous, and then making a tower would keep them from being scattered across the world. This gives some valuable insight because what's being described here is a fear of being forgotten and a fear of their power and influence being watered down. And then as we continue to read in Genesis chapter 11, after they begin building these monuments, God eventually comes down to this city to inspect what mankind has done. And he essentially says, with humanity being this unified, this is only the beginning of what they will do in rebellion against the Lord. And God understood that now there would be no evil thing they could imagine that they would not be able to achieve. For the sake of context, the direct defiance and rebellion God is speaking of here is found just a couple centuries prior in Genesis chapter 9 and verse 1. It's after the great flood, and God commands Noah and his family to be fruitful and multiply so that they will fill the earth. That was God's expressed command, to fill the earth. But here in Genesis chapter 11, their desire was to just fill what they built. They took God's universal command and tried to centralize it for their own benefit. So God, in his infinite wisdom and mercy, decided to interrupt their plans by confusing their language. He took all of the unity that was being misused for their selfish ambition and disrupted it with confusion. And here's where and why the Tower of Babel actually did become famous. Because after mankind no longer understood one another, the Lord scattered them across the entire world. Now it's important to point out here that there's nothing inherently wrong with building a city or a tower. God actually loves it when his creation is creative. The sin being revealed in this instance, however, lies within the heart of the builders. Because the perfect gift that was their unity could have been used to fulfill God's purposes in such magnificent ways that the world would have advanced God's kingdom like never before. But instead, when they abused this perfect gift of unity, it became their curse and led them to rebel against God's will. They sought to establish their own fame and security in what they could do on their own rather than pursuing the promise of their Creator. From here, with all that's been said so far, I think it's a good time to offer a word of warning to those watching and listening, and the warning is this: be careful with what you're building. This admonition is worth our attention because, as we see in our memory verses, just because we can come up with an idea that sounds good to us on the surface and even sounds good to the other people around us, it doesn't automatically mean that we have the right intentions and proper motivations for achieving that good idea. So please, build with caution. Because not all good ideas come from good places. And this goes for whatever it is you're considering investing your time and energy towards. Please do so with wisdom and caution. Whether you're intending to build a business, a family, or even a ministry, do so with the right heart. A heart that's free from any form of self-ambition. Because just as that selfish desire can be the motivation to build you up, it can and will become the thing that brings everything crashing down around you. So again, please build with caution. Looking at these verses, when we speak of building in this way and establishing ourselves in this world, part of what's so tricky about identifying these self-serving desires and when our motivation is off track is that sometimes our selfish motivations can be so well hidden behind our own reasoning, our emotions, and what we feel is a good idea in the moment. It can also be hard to tell when we're building in vain sometimes, because every one of us, at one point or another, has desired to leave our mark in this world. In fact, I'd say that if you're not ever thinking about the legacy you're leaving behind long after you're gone, then you're missing a big part of God's plan for your life. But when we look back at our memory verses, the red flags begin to show up, and we can see what's almost like a rhythm being established by what these individuals are saying among themselves. Phrases like, "Let us build for ourselves," and "make a name for ourselves." I think we can begin to understand what we mean here by this rhythm of self-glorification. And as we mentioned before, it isn't what they were building that was separating them from God's will. It's their selfish ambition, the sinful condition of their hearts. They weren't just trying to build a city or a tower because they thought it would look nice. Their actions were a direct reflection of their desire to establish their own sense of sovereignty that would stand in direct competition with God's. We know the sin in their hearts because they say it out of their mouths. They weren't building a monument to God. They were building a monument to and for themselves. And their ultimate goal was to create a legacy and an empire that would stand as a testament to their own greatness. So again, build with caution. And please be even more careful with who you're trying to build with. And when you notice any of these kinds of selfish motivations being intertwined in what you're attempting to do, I'm telling you now, it's best to just stop where you are and go back to the drawing board, because sooner or later, it will fail you and your tower will fall. And as we see in our memory verses, one of the tools I believe God uses to divinely disrupt our plans when we're on the wrong path is confusion. And I know we've all seen this play out in our own lives on more than one occasion. But we've probably given the credit to the wrong person. Like when you start out in a relationship with someone and everything is just fine in the beginning and you think you're on your way to building something beautiful. But suddenly, almost out of nowhere, you go from being able to finish each other's sentences one day to not being on anywhere near the same page at all. Confusion has entered the chat. Or when you're trying to support a project at work and ask simple questions so that you can gain a better understanding of the vision and direction you're supposed to be going. But your innocent and simple questions are met with a confusing answer that doesn't make any sense at all. Confusion has once again entered the chat. As I'm continuing to live and learn and do the best I can to grow in God's wisdom, I believe that most of the time when this happens and confusion pops up out of nowhere, when things suddenly don't make any sense at all, it's because God has come down to inspect what we've been committing ourselves to, and He can see where it's headed. And when the Lord can't find His purity, His glory, or His purpose in action where it should be, when He inspects the hearts of the builders and finds selfish ambition being perpetrated as radical passion and innocent people being misguided where God has made His vision so clear, I believe this is where God uses confusion to put a stop to what we're doing so that no further damage can be done to ourselves or to those who are building with us. And here is where we must be completely honest with ourselves, because the spirit of Babel isn't confined to an ancient city in the Bible. It resides in every human heart that seeks its own glory. I know I'm not the only one that knows what it's like to try and build my own tower of ambition, career, wealth, or reputation. It's part of our sinful human condition that we instinctively crave recognition, approval, and a name for ourselves. But the unfailing lesson of Babel is clear. Anything that is established on the foundation of human pride will eventually crumble. So please, build with caution. Before we end our study for today, I want to emphasize that the confusion God arranged was purposeful and without contradiction to His character. I make this point because the Bible says in 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and verse 33 that God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. So what happened here in Genesis? It's a good question for us to explore. And as our good and concerned Father, God saw that when humanity was unified in selfishness and fueled by pride, they would be like a runaway train headed for destruction. God has always had and continues to have the foresight to know that a united humanity in rebellion is a force for unimaginable evil that would cast a shadow of oppression over the entire world. And so the Lord intervenes. He didn't become an agent of chaos. All God did in this instance was shine the light of His truth into the darkness of our humanity, and it revealed the confusion and division that was already hiding in the hearts of mankind. In other words, God didn't create the confusion, He just called it out. And it's because of his sovereign mercy and unfailing love, he used confusion as a divine and surgical tool to insert a necessary disruption to dismantle a dangerous and pride-fueled unity. In a way, it's almost as if he performed an emergency surgery on the heart of humanity to save us from ourselves. Because the confusion wasn't the end goal, it was the means to stop a spiritual sickness from consuming God's most precious creation. And then he scattered them, not to punish them, but to once again protect them, and to fulfill his original beautiful plan for them to fill the earth. This is once again a good place for us to do some honest self-examination and consider the areas in our lives where confusion has suddenly interrupted the peace we once enjoyed. And here is where we can ask the question, is it me? Am I the issue? Am I the one that's confused? Am I the one with a hidden agenda that God is disrupting? Is this confusion I'm now encountering God's way of letting me know that what I'm attempting to build isn't what he actually wants, because the heart of my motivation is selfish? Or if you're in a position where you're supporting what's being built and your progress has seemed to unexpectedly hit a dead end because confusion has met you at every turn, maybe it's time to consider whether God is working to let you know that the heart of the vision you're pursuing is more self-centered than you realize. Maybe you've been building on your own and God has been pleased, but you've noticed a sudden disconnect where the integrity of your progress has become distorted after inviting and involving others to help you accomplish the vision. If that's you, then I'd invite you to consider those whom have joined your effort and allow God to reveal their hearts by examining what comes out of their mouths. Just as Babel was used to bring about a necessary confusion and division, God has given us his peace and wisdom as a guide that leads us back to being unified in his name. And thankfully, instead of building our lives on the uncertainty of our own ambition and seeking to make a name for ourselves, God's truth has been established so that we would build our lives on the unshakable rock of Jesus Christ, the one whose name is above every other name. So let us, therefore, humble ourselves before the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt us in due time. Let us lay down our pride and every selfish motivation and run to the strong tower of the Lord, where we find his safety and security and a name that will last for all eternity. As always, I love you, and I pray the truth you embrace today inspires you to live with hope for tomorrow. I'm Minister Mitchell Fields, and this has been Truth for Today. God bless.